The hum of the Resolute's failing engines was the only sound in the command deck. Captain Ilara Quinn stood in front of the viewscreen, watching the massive expanse of deep space unfold before her. The stars were distant pinpricks in the black void, seemingly indifferent to the struggle unfolding far below. Humanity's last warship. Her warship. "Status report," Quinn said, her voice steady despite the rising pressure. Lieutenant Ryo Tanaka, the ship's chief engineer, didn't look up from his station. His fingers danced over the console, but even his practiced movements couldn't mask the tension in his shoulders. "Shields are down to 12%, Captain. Engines are barely holding. We won't be able to outrun them if we need to retreat." Quinn nodded, the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her chest. The Resolute had been through countless battles, each one chipping away at its frame. But this was different. The Varan fleet was relentless. It had already obliterated every last human colony, and now it was coming for the final stronghold, the last of humanity's military might. "How long until the Varans arrive?" she asked. 10 minutes, maybe less," Tanaka replied, his voice tight. "We've already sent out a distress signal, but there's no one left to help. We're on our own." Quinn clenched her jaw, forcing herself to remain calm. The ship's systems were on the brink of failure. The crew was exhausted, and the Varans would be here soon, a fleet of hundreds of warships, with weapons designed to tear through human technology as if it were paper. But there was something in her, something that would never allow her to back down. She turned to face the bridge crew, her gaze sweeping over them. Commander Jason Callahan, the ship's tactical officer, stood by the main weapons console, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He was a man who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer, but this felt different. The end of humanity loomed large on the horizon, and even Callahan couldn't mask his doubts. "Everyone," Quinn began, her voice cutting through the tension. "I know the odds are impossible, but I've seen what we can do when we fight together. The Resolute may be the last ship, but as long as we're standing, we fight. No matter what happens, we do not break. Not today." She let the words settle for a moment, watching as each crew member absorbed the weight of her statement. Then her gaze fixed on Lieutenant Sarah Garcia, the ship's communications officer. Garcia was staring at the monitor, her face pale, but her fingers never stopped typing as she relayed orders. "We'll get one chance," Quinn continued, her voice softening. "One chance to make a stand, and I'm not going to let that slip away." The bridge crew exchanged glances. There was fear in their eyes, fear of what the Varans would do to them. But there was also something else, determination, a defiant fire that refused to die. The humans had been cornered before, and they had always fought back. Quinn had seen it. She had felt it. This was no different. Quinn leaned forward, speaking to the crew with renewed urgency. "Prepare for battle. We will engage them on our terms, with everything we've got. It's not about winning. It's about showing them we will never bend, never break. We fight to the end." "Yes, Captain," the crew responded in unison. Quinn turned back to the view screen, where the first Varan ships were beginning to appear in the distance. They were monstrous, massive and imposing, vessels of cold alien technology designed to crush and enslave. And yet, Quinn didn't flinch. She'd seen worse. The Varans were just another enemy to face down, one more challenge to overcome. As the distant ships grew larger, she took a deep breath, tightening her grip on the armrest of her chair. This would be humanity's final stand. The Resolute wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of everything humanity had fought for, everything they had survived. And she would fight until the last breath, because that's what it meant to be human. 10 minutes, Captain," Garcia called out from her station. Quinn stood tall, locking eyes with each member of her crew. "Then we make every second count." The battle was coming, and humanity was ready to show the Varans just how far they would go to survive. The first flicker of light appeared on the view screen, and Captain Ilara Quinn's eyes narrowed. The Varan fleet was on the move, their sleek black ships slicing through space with terrifying precision. Each ship was a behemoth, armed with weapons designed to obliterate entire fleets in a single barrage. Quinn could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on her, but she refused to show weakness. "Status report, Lieutenant Tanaka," she commanded, her voice calm but firm. Tanaka's hands flew over the console as he called up critical data. "They're coming in fast, Captain. There's no room for evasive maneuvers. If we run, they'll catch us within minutes. We're going to have to fight." "We're not running," Quinn replied. "Prepare the weapons. All systems, full power. We fight here and now." A tense silence fell over the bridge. The crew had heard it all before. Captain Quinn's determination was legendary. But now, the stakes had never been higher. This was no longer about defending a planet or a colony. This was humanity's last fight. "Firing solution locked," Commander Callahan announced, his voice tight with anticipation. "We'll have to rely on surprise. Their fleet is too large, but their coordination isn't perfect. We can hit them where it hurts if we're quick." "Make it count," Quinn ordered. The Resolute's weapons hummed to life, and Quinn felt a surge of adrenaline as the first volley of shots launched into the cold vastness of space. The Varan ships immediately returned fire, their weapons lighting up the void with deadly force. The Resolute rocked under the impact, but it held together, its aged hull creaking, but refusing to break. "Shields holding at 10%, Captain," Tanaka reported. "We're taking hits, but we're still standing." Quinn's fingers tightened around the armrests of her command chair. They were already wounded, but they weren't out. "Not yet. Fire again. Don't give them a chance to regroup," she ordered. The Resolute's weapons fired again, and this time, the Varans weren't ready. One of their smaller cruisers, likely too distracted by the human unpredictability, took a direct hit. It erupted in a flash of sparks and debris, its hull buckling under the assault. A cheer went up from the bridge crew, but Quinn didn't let it distract her. "Don't get complacent. They're regrouping," she warned. "We need to stay mobile. Keep them guessing." The Varan fleet, now fully aware of the Resolute's bold tactics, shifted formation. The enemy ships began to focus their fire, drawing in closer with the intent to overwhelm them with sheer numbers. The bridge vibrated with the impact of another blast. Quinn braced herself against the chair, her mind racing for a solution. "We're not going to outrun them, but we can make them chase us," Callahan suggested, his voice clipped. "If we can force them into a narrow range of fire, we might be able to catch them off guard." Quinn nodded. "Do it. Bring them in close, but keep our speed high enough to dodge the brunt of their shots. Let's make them feel our sting." The crew worked in perfect synchrony. As the Varan ships closed in, the Resolute performed an unexpected maneuver. It dove toward the edge of the enemy formation, its remaining engines screaming in protest. The Varan ships, unable to react fast enough, found themselves in a crossfire. The Resolute's cannons fired at full force, punching through the hull of another Varan ship, sending it spiraling into the void. "We've got them on the defensive," Callahan exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. For a brief moment, the human crew felt the surge of triumph. Against all odds, the Varans had underestimated them. But Quinn knew better than to let her guard down. The Varans were ruthless and adaptable. They would regroup. They would come back harder. "Hold steady," she said. "They won't be down for long." As predicted, the Varan ships began to realign, focusing their fire on the Resolute. The human warship absorbed more blows, the shields flickering dangerously close to failure. Quinn's heart raced, but her mind remained sharp. Every move had to count. She could feel the weight of the crew's hopes resting on her decisions. "Tanaka, status on the engines?" Quinn asked, her voice calm in the face of the growing storm. "Engines are at 40% power, Captain," Tanaka responded. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." Quinn didn't have time to dwell on that. She looked out at the enemy fleet, their formation tightening. "Give me one more shot," she said. "Full power to the forward weapons. We need to make them bleed." The bridge crew responded with grim determination, moving with precision. Another barrage of fire erupted from the Resolute, this time aimed at the heart of the Varan formation. A massive Varan destroyer, its hull gleaming like polished obsidian, took a direct hit. It rocked under the force, its shields crackling before a devastating explosion tore through its side. For a moment, the enemy fleet seemed to falter. The Resolute had made its mark. "Captain," Callahan said, his voice uncharacteristically full of awe, "we've just taken down one of their flagship destroyers." Quinn didn't smile. There was no time for celebration. "Good. Now we survive the next wave." The Varan fleet was in disarray, but it wouldn't be for long. They were far from finished. The Resolute had proven its strength, but the battle was just beginning. The battle raged on, and the Resolute held its ground. Despite the vast power disparity, the crew of the final human warship continued to defy the odds. Captain Ilara Quinn stood tall, her eyes sharp as she watched the Varan fleet begin to shift its tactics. The enemy had lost one of their flagship destroyers, and now their formation was disjointed, their confidence shaken. But Quinn knew better than to get complacent. The Varans were not easily defeated, and they would adapt quickly. "Captain, they're reconfiguring," Commander Jason Callahan reported, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "They're coming in fast, splitting their fleet into two prongs to flank us." Quinn's jaw tightened as she considered their next move. The Resolute was still heavily outnumbered, and though they had inflicted damage, it was far from enough to break the Varan's will. "We can't let them box us in," she said. "We need to keep them on the defensive, force them to spread out even further." "Understood," Callahan replied, his eyes flicking over the tactical display. "I have a plan. It's risky, but it might just work." Quinn didn't hesitate. "Do it." The Resolute shot forward, engines roaring as the crew pushed the ship to its limits. They darted through the chaotic debris of the Varan fleet, weaving in and out of the enemy's path. The Resolute wasn't the fastest ship in the galaxy, but it was agile, and it had one thing the Varans didn't: unpredictability. The crew had spent years learning how to use their warship's unique quirks to their advantage, and now it was time to put that knowledge to the test. The Varans, confident in their technological superiority, had underestimated the humans' adaptability. They had expected the Resolute to break under the pressure, to crumble before their superior firepower, but they hadn't anticipated the human spirit, the drive to survive, to outthink their enemies in ways the Varans couldn't understand. "Brace for impact," Tanaka shouted as the ship jolted again, a blast from a Varan dreadnought striking the aft shields. "Shields are holding at 5%, Tanaka continued, his voice strained but resolute. "We've got minimal power, Captain." Quinn's fingers clenched around the armrests of her chair. "Keep pushing. We're not giving up now." The Resolute's weapon systems powered up again, and Quinn gave the order. The ship fired once more, this time targeting the weak points in the Varan fleet's formation. A barrage of laser blasts tore into the heart of a group of smaller Varan cruisers. The human ship was barely able to evade the incoming fire, but the move was enough to shake the Varans. A few of their ships collided in a stunning display of chaos, unable to react in time to avoid the Resolute's attacks. "Direct hit," Callahan called out. "One of their cruisers is down." "They're retreating." "No. Wait. They're reconfiguring. They're forming a new line." Quinn watched the shifting tactics unfold on the view screen. It was clear now. The Varans were not just angry. They were afraid. And that fear was their weakness. "We've got them rattled," Quinn murmured, her eyes never leaving the screen. "But we need to push harder. Callahan, make sure we're ready for the next wave." "Already on it," Callahan replied. "We're still taking hits, but their focus is slipping. If we keep hammering them, they'll break." "Not if. When," Quinn corrected him. "We're not just going to survive this. We're going to make them regret underestimating us." The Resolute fired again, this time landing a direct hit on another Varan ship, this one larger, heavily armored, and considered one of the flagships in the Varan fleet. The explosion was massive, sending shockwaves through the enemy lines. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The Varans hesitated, their coordination thrown into disarray. "Did we just?" Callahan started, his voice incredulous. "We did," Quinn said, a small but victorious smile tugging at her lips. "We've breached their flagship's defenses. This is our chance." The Varans, their confidence shattered by the destruction of their flagship, began to falter. The survivors scrambled to reestablish their formation, but the damage had already been done. The Resolute had struck a devastating blow, and the Varans were now in full retreat, their pride wounded. Captain Garcia, the communications officer, called out from her station. "The Varans are pulling back. They're signaling for reinforcements, but they're not pushing forward. They're on the defensive." Quinn exhaled, her breath shaky but filled with relief. They had done it. Against all odds, the Resolute had given the Varans a fight they hadn't expected. The alien fleet had been forced to retreat, at least temporarily, but Quinn knew this wasn't over. "We've earned a moment of breathing room," Quinn said, her voice steady. "But we won't get a second chance. Let's prepare for their next move." She turned back to the view screen, watching as the Varans began to regroup. The humans might have gained the upper hand, for now, but they couldn't afford to be complacent. The war was far from over, and the Varans would be back. The Resolute limped away from the wreckage of the battle, its engines sputtering and shields barely holding as the crew worked in overdrive to patch up the warship's critical systems. Captain Ilara Quinn stood at the helm, her gaze unwavering as she watched the Varan fleet begin to pull back. For a brief moment, she allowed herself a small, silent victory. They had done the impossible. They had fought back a superior enemy. But as the silence of space settled around them, Quinn knew the reprieve would be short-lived. The Varans were not known for retreating without a plan. They were regrouping, recalculating, and preparing for the next phase of the battle. "Captain," Commander Jason Callahan said, his voice cutting through the stillness, "we've done a number on them, but they're getting ready for something bigger. I don't think they'll let us off that easy." Quinn nodded, her expression hardening. "I know. They'll come back with more force. We need to be ready." "We've got time," Callahan continued, his tone cautious. "Their reinforcements are still a few minutes out, but we can't afford to sit here and wait for them to organize. We need to hit them while they're still trying to reorganize." Quinn turned to the tactical display, where the Varan fleet was beginning to split again. This time, their strategy was clear: divide and conquer. They were sending their smaller, faster ships ahead, likely to flank the Resolute, while the larger dreadnoughts moved slowly but surely into position to corner them. It was a classic move, designed to overwhelm their enemy with a two-pronged attack. "They're trying to box us in," Quinn muttered, her mind racing through their limited options. "Callahan, how long until we're in range of their smaller ships?" 5 minutes, maybe less," Callahan said, fingers tapping rapidly over the console. "We need to decide fast." Quinn's gaze flicked to her crew, each member hunched over their stations, working together with an urgency that could only come from years of experience and loyalty. Despite the odds, despite everything that had already gone wrong, they weren't giving up. She couldn't afford to let them down. "We're going to hit them first," Quinn said, her voice sharp. "We'll take out their small ships before they have a chance to flank us. Then we'll draw the larger ships in, bait them into the trap." There was a murmur of agreement, and even a few nods of respect. It was a bold plan, but it was the only one they had. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had something the Varans didn't: human ingenuity, and the will to fight when all seemed lost. "Lieutenant Tanaka, how's our power supply?" Quinn asked, turning to her engineer. Tanaka wiped sweat from his brow and glanced at the power readings on his screen. We're holding steady, but we're at 40%. We won't be able to maintain full firepower for long, especially if we need to keep maneuvering." "Understood," Quinn said. "Make sure we have enough energy for the main weapons. We'll need them to hit fast and hard." As Tanaka nodded and went to work, Quinn stood at the center of the bridge, her thoughts focused on the task ahead. They had only one shot at this. The Varens were closing in, and the Resolute had to take the initiative before the enemy's sheer numbers crushed them. "All hands, prepare for combat," Quinn announced, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is our moment. We take the fight to them, not the other way around." The bridge crew fell into their battle stations, a sense of unity pulsing through the room. Each person was ready to give everything for the mission. "For humanity. Captain, we're about to enter range of their smaller ships," Callahan called out, his voice steady but edged with tension. "They're on a direct intercept course. Engage evasive maneuvers, full throttle," Quinn ordered. "We need to keep them off balance." The Resolute roared back into the fray, its remaining engines pushing the warship forward at a breakneck speed. The Varen ships had been expecting a retreat, but instead they were met with the full fury of humanity's last line of defense. The smaller Varen cruisers swarmed toward them like wolves closing in on their prey, but the Resolute danced between them, striking with precision. "First wave of small ships down," Callahan reported, his fingers flying across the console as he tracked the engagements. "We're holding our ground, but there's more on the way." "Keep it up," Quinn said, her eyes fixed on the display. "We can do this." The human warship weaved and spun through the battlefield, its weapons blasting away at the Varen cruisers. With every shot, they created a ripple of destruction, but for every small victory, the Varens sent another wave of ships in response. Quinn's heart raced as the battle grew more intense, but her resolve never wavered. "Shields at 3%. Tanaka shouted, the panic in his voice rising. "We're almost out of energy." "Just a little longer," Quinn urged. "We're going to hit them hard when their larger ships come in. Get ready." As the larger Varen dreadnoughts began to move into position, Quinn's mind sharpened. This was the moment they had been waiting for. With one last, decisive strike, they could break the enemy's will. And if they didn't, the Resolute would fall, but humanity's legacy would burn bright until the very end. The Resolute buckled under the pressure of the Varen assault, the bridge shuddering violently as another blast hit the weakened shields. Captain Ilara Quinn gripped the armrest of her chair, refusing to let the fear show on her face. The Varens were almost upon them. There would be no more room for evasive maneuvers. This was the moment, the one final chance to prove humanity's resolve. "Shields are at 1%, Lieutenant Tanaka reported, his voice strained. "We can't take much more of this, Captain." "Understood," Quinn replied, her voice firm. "We have one shot left. We need to take down their dreadnoughts before they overwhelm us." Commander Jason Callahan's fingers flew over the tactical console, calculating the optimal strike. "We've knocked out some of their smaller ships, but the larger dreadnoughts are still holding back. If we can break through their defensive line, we might stand a chance." Quinn turned to him, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "Then we break it." The Varen fleet had begun to close in, their larger ships slowly forming a deadly encirclement. The remaining smaller Varen cruisers were circling like vultures, ready to swoop in for the kill. The Resolute had taken out dozens of smaller ships, but the dreadnoughts were the real threat. If they could break through, the rest of the Varens would crumble. "We're going to push through the middle," Quinn said, her mind racing. "Tanaka, reroute all available power to the forward weapons and engines. We're going to ram through their line and hit their biggest dreadnought." "Are you sure about this?" Callahan asked, his voice low but concerned. "The Resolute won't survive a direct assault like that. We're running on fumes." "We don't have a choice," Quinn said, her tone resolute. "We push forward or we die here. This is humanity's last stand, and I'm not letting them take us without making them bleed for it." The crew's eyes flicked between Quinn and the screens. They had all known that this day could come, that the Resolute might not survive. But there was something in their hearts that refused to back down. Something in the fight that made them want to prove that humanity, though beaten and broken, could still go out with a roar. Full power to the engines, now, Tanaka barked, his fingers flying across the console. The Resolute lurched forward, its hull creaking under the strain as the engines roared to life. The ship, though battered and scarred, surged ahead with surprising speed, slicing through the chaos of the battle. The Varan ships, taken by surprise at the sudden momentum, struggled to react in time as the Resolute made its way toward the heart of their formation. Braced for impact, Quinn shouted as the ship hurtled directly toward the largest Varan dreadnought. The bridge rattled violently, alarms blaring as the crew prepared for the inevitable collision. The hum of the weapons systems echoed through the ship, ready to unleash their full power. Firing. Callahan called out. The forward weapons unleashed a devastating barrage, slamming directly into the Varan dreadnought's weak points. The explosion that followed was massive. The dreadnought's shields flickered and failed under the onslaught, and the Resolute's strike hit its vulnerable core. The blast sent shockwaves through space, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The view screen showed the dreadnought's broken hull, the explosion sending it careening into the debris field. The Varans had taken heavy damage. "Direct hit, Captain," Callahan exclaimed, awe and disbelief in his voice. "We did it." Quinn didn't allow herself to smile. They had taken down one of their biggest threats, but the battle was far from over. The remaining Varan ships were regrouping, and they were angrier than ever. "Don't celebrate just yet," Quinn said, her voice low and focused. "The dreadnought's down, but they'll regroup. We need to take advantage of the chaos we've caused and keep them off balance." "We've bought ourselves some time," Tanaka added, his hands flying over the controls as he stabilized the ship. "But we're at less than 10% power. The next few minutes will determine everything." The bridge was tense, the crew working together in perfect synchronization. The Varans were reeling, but their pride would not allow them to back down. They would come at the Resolute with everything they had left. "Captain," Lieutenant Garcia said from the communication station, "the Varans are sending out a new wave of ships. They're desperate now, trying to finish us off." "Let them come," Quinn said, her voice steely. "We fought harder than they thought possible. Now we finish this." With the dreadnought gone, the Resolute now had a fighting chance. The remaining Varan ships were slower to regroup, and their disarray had given the humans a sliver of hope. Quinn could feel the weight of humanity's last fight pressing on her, but she wasn't about to let it crush her. This was their time to strike back, to show the Varans that humanity would never be erased without a fight. "All hands, prepare for the final assault," Quinn ordered, her voice carrying through the bridge. "We don't stop until every last Varan ship is in the void." The crew exchanged determined looks, ready to see this fight through to the end. The Resolute had taken a beating, but it wasn't done yet. It was time to show the Varans that humanity wasn't finished. The Resolute drifted in the wake of the explosion, its hull battered and scarred from the earlier barrage. A thin veil of smoke wafted through the corridors of the warship, and the dimmed lights flickered ominously, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. On the bridge, Captain Ilara Quinn gripped the armrest of her chair, eyes fixed on the tactical display as the Varan fleet, though shattered, began to regroup. "Captain," Commander Jason Callahan said, his voice hoarse but resolute, "they're coming at us full force now. All remaining Varan ships are converging on our position. They're pissed." Quinn's jaw tightened. She could see the enemy ships slowly closing in, their sheer numbers threatening to swallow them whole. The Resolute was running on fumes, barely enough power to maintain its systems, let alone engage in another full-scale battle. "We've got a few minutes before they reach us," Quinn said, her mind working furiously. "How's our weapons status?" Lieutenant Tanaka glanced at the power gauges and shook his head. We've got minimal firepower left, Captain. We can't afford to waste it. And our shields? Down to nothing, Tanaka replied, his voice grim. We're completely exposed. The weight of the situation settled in, and Quinn knew there was no retreating. There was no escape from the final push now. They had given the Varens a taste of humanity's strength, but this last encounter would determine if the Resolute, and by extension, humanity itself, could survive. We've got one shot at this, Quinn said, voice cold but resolute. We'll use every last drop of power to make sure we go out on our terms. Tanaka, reroute everything to weapons and maneuvering thrusters. No more shields, just speed and firepower. You got it, Captain, Tanaka said, quickly working the controls. Callahan, I want you to focus fire on their command ships, Quinn ordered. The Varens are organized, and we need to cut their leadership. We disrupt them. They fall apart. Callahan nodded sharply, the fire in his eyes matching Quinn's. Understood. I'll make sure they feel it. Quinn turned her attention to the view screen. The Varen ships were closing fast, their ominous silhouette filling the screen. The bridge was silent except for the soft hum of the Resolute's engines and the occasional beeping of the tactical systems. The crew was tense, preparing for the inevitable. We've come this far, Quinn said quietly, her voice carrying a sense of finality. Now we show them what humanity is capable of. The Resolute surged forward, its engines pushing the warship to its limits as it rocketed toward the Varen fleet. The remaining human ships, small and insignificant in comparison to the enemy size, followed suit, ready to fight to the last. First wave incoming. Callahan shouted, his voice sharp with adrenaline. Firing. The Resolute fired everything it had left. A barrage of concentrated laser blasts streaked through the void, cutting into the heart of the closest Varen command ship. The explosion was a thing of beauty, a blinding flash that tore through the Varen ranks. The ship's powerful shields had failed, and the blast sent a ripple of destruction through the surrounding vessels. We've crippled their command vessel, Callahan exclaimed. That's a serious blow to their coordination. Keep it up, Quinn barked, her focus unwavering. We need to take out the rest before they can regroup. The Resolute dodged between incoming fire, using its dwindling thrusters to maneuver in ways that made the larger Varen ships struggle to land a clean shot. The Varens, despite their superior firepower, hadn't anticipated how fiercely the humans would fight, how determined they were to survive, no matter the cost. Shields are failing, Tanaka warned, as the Resolute took another hit. Hull integrity at 25%. Let them hit us, Quinn said, her voice steely. We're going to make them regret ever underestimating us. The Resolute continued its assault, firing relentlessly at the Varen ships, picking off one target at a time. The bridge was a cacophony of sounds, the hum of weapons firing, the whir of systems rerouting power, the quiet groan of a ship strained to its breaking point. But in the chaos, Quinn could feel the shift. The Varens were beginning to falter. Another command vessel down, Callahan reported. Their fleet's disorganized. They're starting to panic. Good, Quinn said. Keep them on the run. This is it, our final stand. We take them down now, or we go down swinging. The Resolute moved through the battlefield like a vengeful spirit, unleashing a torrent of fire as the crew worked in perfect harmony. The Varens were losing ships, and the remaining enemy forces were scrambling, disoriented and afraid. But just as Quinn began to feel a flicker of hope, the final wave of Varen ships appeared. Captain, there's one last dreadnought, Lieutenant Garcia warned. It's heading straight for us. The massive Varen ship was enormous, its hull bristling with weapons, and its shields were nearly impenetrable. It was the Varens' final attempt to crush them. The Resolute was already wounded beyond repair, but Quinn wouldn't back down. Not now. All hands, Quinn said, her voice calm but full of determination. We have one shot left. We're going to take that dreadnought down, or we die trying. The crew's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, there was no fear, only resolve. "Engage," Quinn commanded. The Resolute roared forward, its remaining firepower focused on the oncoming dreadnought. The final battle had begun. The bridge of the Resolute shook violently as another blast struck the hull. The view screen flickered as sparks shot from the consoles, but Captain Ilara Quinn remained unfazed. The last Varan dreadnought loomed on the screen, its size dominating the battlefield, its weapons powered up and ready to obliterate them. The final push had begun, and there was no turning back. "Brace for impact," Lieutenant Tanaka shouted, his voice strained. "Shields are down. This is it. Keep firing," Quinn commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "We take down that dreadnought, or we die trying." The Resolute surged forward, engines screaming in protest as it pushed beyond its limits. The Varan dreadnought's massive guns fired, the energy blasts slamming into the hull, sending tremors through the ship. The Resolute rocked violently, its systems flickering as it strained to stay on course. "Enemy fire is intense," Commander Jason Callahan reported, his fingers dancing across the tactical console. "We've lost engine power in 2 sectors. Hull integrity at 10%. Focus fire on the dreadnought's weak spots," Quinn ordered, her eyes locked on the screen. "We're going for its command center." Despite the damage, the Resolute pressed on, its weapons firing relentlessly at the Varan dreadnought. Laser beams streaked through space, smashing into the dreadnought's shields, but the massive vessel's defenses held firm. The Varan's final assault was like a vice, slowly closing in on them. "Captain, we've got incoming fighters," Lieutenant Garcia shouted from the communications station. "They're swarming from all sides, dozens of them." "We can't afford to deal with them now," Quinn said, her voice calm but edged with urgency. "Callahan, target their engines and let's break their formation." "We'll be sitting ducks," Callahan protested, eyes wide with concern. "We need to handle the fighters before they overwhelm us." "Take out the dreadnought first," Quinn barked. "Once we're through that, we'll focus on the smaller ships. We finish this now." The Resolute fired everything it had left. Every last energy blast, every laser cannon, every missile they could muster. The Varan dreadnought's shield began to flicker, struggling under the relentless assault. Quinn could see it. Their final chance. The massive ship was starting to show signs of strain, its once impenetrable shields weakening with every strike. "Power's draining fast," Captain Tanaka warned. "We're down to less than 5%. "We're almost there," Quinn said, gritting her teeth. "Don't stop now." The Resolute shook again, this time with a bone-rattling force. A direct hit to the engine bay sent sparks flying across the bridge, and the entire ship seemed to groan under the strain. The lights flickered, then went out completely for a few harrowing seconds, leaving only the low hum of emergency systems. "Shields are down to 0, Tanaka reported, his voice hoarse. "Hull breaches in multiple sectors. This ship's done for." "Not yet," Quinn shouted, refusing to accept defeat. "We still have a weapon, our last missile. Fire everything at that command center. We take it down now." The crew, their faces drawn and tired, worked with mechanical precision. In their final moments, there was no hesitation. The missile was armed, aimed directly at the Varan dreadnought's weak point, the heart of its command center. "Missile away," Callahan called out. The Resolute seemed to hold its breath as the missile streaked through space, its guidance systems locking onto the dreadnought's vulnerable core. The Varans reacted too late, their final line of defense too slow to intercept the incoming missile. The tension on the bridge was unbearable, every second stretching into eternity. Then the missile hit. An explosion of unimaginable force erupted on the Varan dreadnought. The screen flashed white, and for a moment, Quinn thought she had gone blind. The shockwave reverberated through space, tearing apart the dreadnought's hull and sending debris flying in all directions. A massive ball of fire erupted from the center of the ship, consuming it in an instant. The Resolute shuddered as the blast hit them too, the shockwave sending the already battered ship into a wild spin. But Quinn didn't care. She watched as the once mighty Varen dreadnought crumpled in on itself, a twisted, flaming wreck. Humanity had won. Direct hit, Callahan shouted, his voice filled with a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. "We did it, Captain. We actually did it." Quinn exhaled a long, ragged breath, her eyes never leaving the burning remains of the Varen flagship. Her heart was pounding, her pulse rushing in her ears. She knew they'd done the impossible. The Varen fleet had been shattered, its final hope crushed in the flames of a single missile strike. But the cost had been enormous. "We've lost the Resolute," Tanaka said, his voice flat. "We're dead in the water." Quinn looked around the bridge. Her crew, though exhausted, was still there. They hadn't given up. They had done what no one thought possible. And in doing so, they had secured humanity's place in the galaxy. "All hands," Quinn said, her voice soft but unwavering. "We've won the war. Humanity has endured." And with that, the Resolute drifted through the silence of space, its mission complete, its legacy cemented forever in the annals of history. The Resolute drifted through the quiet emptiness of space, a ghost ship now, its once proud hull broken and battered beyond repair. The battle had ended, but the scars of war were etched deep into every part of the ship. Sparks still flickered from damaged consoles, and the lights hummed weakly, struggling to stay alive in the heart of the dying vessel. The crew was silent, the weight of their victory and their losses settling over them like a heavy shroud. On the bridge, Captain Ilara Quinn stood before the view screen, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. The Varen fleet was no more. The dreadnought that had threatened to destroy them lay in ruin, and the other Varen ships had scattered or been destroyed. The humans had won, but at what cost? "Captain," Callahan's voice broke the silence. He stood beside her, his face drawn and tired, the lines of battle etched deeply in his expression. "We did it, but we've lost so much." Quinn nodded, her expression unreadable. "I know. We've lost the Resolute, and we've lost good people." Her eyes drifted to the empty seats around the bridge, the crew members who had given their lives to bring the fight to the Varens. "But we also proved something today. We showed them that humanity won't go down quietly." Callahan glanced at the damaged control panels, then back at Quinn. "I don't think anyone could have expected this, what we did. The odds were too high. We didn't just survive," Quinn said, her voice firm now. "We won, and that's something no one can ever take away from us. We've proven that humanity is capable of greatness, even when everything is stacked against us. We didn't break. We stood tall. Not just the Resolute," Callahan added quietly, "but all of us. Everyone who fought alongside us." Quinn's eyes softened as she looked around the bridge. Her crew, her family, had been through hell and back, but they had held strong. Together, they had accomplished the impossible. The Resolute might be lost, but their legacy would live on. "We won't forget them," Quinn said, her voice thick with emotion. "The ones we lost. Their sacrifice will never be forgotten." "Captain," Lieutenant Tanaka said from the communication station, his voice faint but steady. "We've received a transmission from the fleet. They're coming. They've heard about the victory. The war is over." The relief that flooded Quinn's chest was almost overwhelming. The Federation's remaining ships had survived, and the reinforcements were finally on their way. Humanity had endured, and the war was over. But there was a long road ahead. The Varens had been defeated, but the scars of war would remain long after the fires of battle had burned out. The Federation would need to rebuild, to heal. There would be no quick return to the old ways, but they had proven that they could rise from the ashes, just as they always had. Quinn walked over to the command chair, sinking into it for the first time since the battle had begun. Her mind was a whirlwind, processing everything. The chaos, the carnage, the moments of fear and hope that had carried them through. It all led to this moment. Humanity had stood strong, and they had won the impossible war. "Captain," Tanaka's voice was steady, but it carried an edge of disbelief. "The fleet just arrived. The Resolute's transmission was intercepted, and they want to hold a memorial for all who fell. The victory will be celebrated across the Federation." Quinn nodded slowly, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. "They deserve that. The people who fought beside us, the ones who died, we owe them everything." The crew was still, each person processing the victory in their own way. Outside the window, the stars stretched endlessly, a reminder of the vastness of space. But now, there was something different, something new. The Federation had held its ground. Humanity had proven itself in a way no one could ever forget. Quinn stood up from the chair, her eyes sweeping over her crew one last time. "We may have lost the Resolute, but we didn't lose our spirit. We fought until the end, and that's what will carry us forward. Our legacy will live on. We won't let this be the end of humanity's story." The crew gathered around her, each of them standing a little taller, their faces weary but determined. Together, they had survived. Together, they had won. And together, they would rebuild. Quinn smiled faintly. "Humanity refuses to break. We've proven that today. We'll rebuild, we'll thrive, and we will never forget what we fought for." As the Resolute drifted on, a new chapter in the Federation's history began. A chapter forged in the fire of war, but one that would see humanity rise, stronger than ever before.